We're ready.
Good evening. Tonight we're holding a special City Commission meeting to do interviews for the Planning Commission and the Historic Review Board. Just to preface this, that in the last election in May, primary election in May, the process of selecting Historic Review Board members and Planning Commission members was changed so that it would be done by the City Commission. So pursuant to that, we have scheduled interviews, and we have candidates here tonight who are going to be doing interviews. Other than that, I will turn this over to Mr. Conkle to start it off, and then we will go directly into that.
Thank you. I'll turn this over to Jacob, who prepared the staff report. But as the mayor stated, so this is a brand new process. The commission did adopt a policy on how they wanted to perform interviews for Historic Review Board and the Planning Commission, and that the commission itself would be holding those interviews, asking those questions, and then we've recommended that the commission make a decision at the January 4th City Commission meeting as to who the choice is for the positions that are available. So for Historic Review Board, we have 2 applicants. Historic Review Board's a little bit different in that the makeup of the board is identified in the municipal code. So right now we're interviewing for a representative from Kenema and a representative from McLaughlin. Others might be an at-large or an architect. So these are 2 specific positions that are being interviewed for tonight.
The only position on the Historic Review Board that is not specific is we have 1 at-large position, which is currently filled, but there are 4 members who have specific skills or talents. We have the, as you said, it's the architect's position, but it's technically could be any of those disciplines: landscape, building construction, with an emphasis on historic structures. It could be architectural historian. It's a little broader. And then we have, as you said, a resident of the McLaughlin Conservation District and a resident of the Kenema National Register District, a representative from the Oregon City Chamber, and we have the at-large position. So that rounds out the board that we have.
And as you'll notice on your interview, Mr. Paul was not available tonight, so we are going to do his interview early on the meeting of the 21st of December.
Yeah, I believe he is traveling. All right. So we're going to do the Planning Commission first.
Historic.
Is that correct? Historic. Oh, historic. Oh, yes. We have. Yeah. All right. So I will call up Mr. Green. Come on up. And just for the record, even though our names are here, I'll just have everybody introduce themselves, starting to my right.
Rocky Smith. And on the far right, I'm Frank O'Donnell.
To my left.
Mike Mitchell. Adam Marl.
And Denise McGriff. And I am actually familiar with Mr. Green. So we have a order. So who's got the first question?
I do.
All right, go.
Welcome, Mr. Green.
Thank you.
So the first question is simply, why are you applying for a position on the Historic Review Board?
I did go through the process, and I'll confess I had some misgivings because I feel like I'm a bit of a newbie. Moved to Oregon City a little over a year ago, but I did go through the process and build a home in Kenema, and I've monitored several of the meetings, not all of them, but particularly the ones that had applications in Kenema. And my background, and by the way, I go by Dave Green. You probably see Robert David Green, but I go by my middle name. So that, for that possible confusion. But I've been a contractor since 1973, recently retired. And I guess one thing that kind of occurred to me occasionally, it seemed like it would be helpful to have construction background on the board, and in years gone by, that's maybe been the case. I don't have formal design education, but I've done a little bit of informal design, designed my own house in Kenema, and done some design build and so forth over the years. And I think that perhaps the building construction background could be helpful.
Thank you, sir.
All right, and what is your background in historic preservation?
I actually started in construction right out of high school and got my license in 1973 and started doing remodels and additions and so forth. And basically, I've been just a small contractor for my whole career, generally 2 or 3 employees, custom home construction, just never did specs, so probably over the course of my career, I'm guessing maybe 30 homes, something like that. Maybe go a couple years and do just remodels and additions and so forth, and then maybe a couple homes. So probably, I'm guessing maybe about 30 new homes, but additions and subcontract carpentry work and so forth for other general contractors. So did that until essentially about 2 years ago, and I basically retired from contracting because I was spending pretty much full-time on my own project, doing most of the work myself.
Have you worked on any historic homes?
Probably not listed homes, but I certainly have
Older
worked.
is good.
Yeah, on old historic homes, done remodels and so forth. Did a fairly large remodel on an old 4-square in southeast Portland, and I've been intrigued with the historic architecture, and of course got some education when I started the process with the design guidelines and so forth for Kenema on the specific architecture, looking for there. So,
Was it mostly interior or exterior?
probably about half and half.
About half and half.
Yeah, because carpentry is my trade, so did quite a bit of, we always did our own, on my own projects, all our carpentry, decks, siding, framing, did a certain amount of subcontract framing, but then remodel projects were additions, decks, window replacement, kitchen, baths, just pretty much the spectrum of remodeling.
Well, I have the next one. So how do the criteria, standards, and the design guidelines assist the public and applicants to know what they can do with their historic property?
As far as the design guidelines as they stand now, is that the
Well, yes,
question?
we have criteria. We also have standards. In Kenema, of course, the National Register standards apply where they don't necessarily apply in McLaughlin unless the house is on the National Register.
I guess I've grappled with that mentally a little bit because clearly there's going to be a spectrum of thought or values on how rigid the design guidelines are, and I've heard that and kind of grappled with it myself. I think that the historic resources that are significant in Oregon City are worth protecting, and I think the design guidelines in my mind are pretty good. It seemed like about 2 years ago there was like a symposium or something where the public were invited to share their thoughts, and I don't know if any of that actually got applied to updating the guidelines. As far as I know, they're still as they were published when I got them, when I built my home, the 2006 iteration, I think it is.
They have been.
But I think there's always incidentals, and I've heard fairly strong feelings on tightening them up and relaxing them, and that's understandable. I mean, there's going to be a spectrum of opinion on that. I think they're pretty good. I will say that communication is very important, and it seems like some of the struggles that I've observed in watching the meetings are perhaps ambiguity in the, either in the communication between the board and staff or the staff and the applicant. And of course, a problem is if things are done out of compliance, and I've grappled with that too, and I guess I don't necessarily need to offer more than you're asking, but one thing that I think might be of value would be an interim inspection to see if conditions of approval are being met at that extent. And I guess I do that with some reservations as a contractor because we never like more imposed on us than was necessary, but it does seem problematic if you're right down to certificate of occupancy and there are significant deviations, then that puts a real burden on the board and a burden on the applicant, so.
Yeah, I think I could have been a little clearer because obviously there's a difference between new construction and you answered from the standpoint of an existing historic house, and thank you, that was very appropriate and very good. New construction is, you've got a little more wiggle room with what we're looking at, as you did with your home.
Sure.
Adam?
Yes. Have you previously served on an appointed board, and if so, what was the most rewarding part of the position and the most frustrating?
Could you run that by me again, sorry?
If you've served on an appointed board, and if you have, what's been the most rewarding and most frustrating parts of that?
The only thing that I've served on is I am on the steering committee for the Kanema Neighborhood Association. But other than that, I've not really been involved in any civic affairs. I moved from Portland and was never involved in neighborhood associations or any of the civic affairs, particularly because it seemed like my voice would be lost. But I have been involved since I purchased the property on a fairly regular basis with the neighborhood association and have found that rewarding. So. Yeah.
Before we continue, Mr. Wiley, is there a copy of the questions on the table? That would be great. I should have looked to see whether it was sitting there in the first place. All right. Mike.
Okay, so.
Mike's going to ask you the next question, so.
Okay.
Did you finish what you wanted to say on the last one?
On number 4, the rewarding part of the position, is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I've found it rewarding to be on that steering committee in the neighborhood association. That I discovered when I became involved that the Kanema Neighborhood Association has some history of being active, and I didn't find it off-putting, but I will say that my interactions with pretty much all the neighbors have been good, and I'm glad that that's been the case so far. Clearly, there's a variety of opinions and so forth, but my involvement in that, and like I say, that's the only involvement I've had on an appointed board, and I can't say that really I've experienced any frustrations in that endeavor. Honestly, did not feel particularly frustrated when I went through the process, getting approvals for my home. And I can see a lot of frustration with applicants that do that, because Kanema in particular has so many overlays to deal with, and my process was about a 3-year process. And that most people would find incredibly frustrating. I was fortunate in that I had time on my side, and I knew it would be a lot of hurdles to accomplish, and with that foreknowledge, it wasn't overly frustrating. I mean, it was frustrating, and when I discussed it with some people, they say, you must be tearing your hair out. And I think there's room for improvement in particularly interaction with the geological hazards and natural resources and historic review. It becomes a very onerous process, and you know, I would see that that's very potentially frustrating to applicants, and I can see some frustration and being involved in the board, but my experience so far is not.
I thank you for clarifying that, because it is not really the historic review part that hangs people up. It's the geotechnical and the natural resources overlay, which again,
Largely so.
The board is conscientious of it, but they don't really control that. It's really about the land. And I would agree with you that people don't go into that with their eyes open, knowing that they've bought a piece of property or they're going to buy a piece of property with that constraint. So
And I can see that each entity is kind of constrained within their own parameters, and I guess if a long-term goal would be that between those entities, if there could be interaction that would complement the other's efforts in some regard, it would help that. I mean,
Well,
it's a tall order, I realize that.
it's all within the city, but it's mostly engineering, which is,
Yep.
you know, you have to make sure that the house you're building is not going to fall off the side of the cliff, and maybe
And that was my experience, yeah.
in some of the cases that may be a lot that's not really buildable. I mean, you know, they platted Kanema, you know, not seeing what was really there. They just drew some lines on a map, and then when people bought it, it was like, oh, there's some slopes here. Oh, there's water here. Nobody knew that.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, we are, Adam, we're back to you.
No, me.
Oh, Mike, sorry.
How would you approach a potentially contentious hearing, knowing that there are passionate opinions on both sides of the issue?
Start off by trying to listen as close as possible. And you can probably tell I've got a little hearing challenge, and this room is a real live room. That's why I didn't quite catch the previous question. But listening closely and trying to draw on any positive aspect of a passionate concern, realizing that if there are opposing concerns, there is going to have to be a middle ground found, and perhaps realizing maybe the best middle ground is if nobody leaves happy, but everybody is okay. And you folks are probably very experienced in dealing with that, because I think that's just the nature of that sort of scenario.
Thank you.
All right. What do you believe is the role of the Historic Review Board and the role of neighborhood associations as it relates to HRB decisions?
Well, I think the role of the Historic Review Board certainly is to preserve the historic resources within a reasonable bound, and I foresee that you have a potential clash of private property rights versus the right of, or the benefit of the general public as far as preserving historic resources. Preserving something that is owned privately pretty much always puts constraints on that property owner. And so the role of the HRB, as I see it, is to try to balance those in the best interest of, within reason, preserving resources and the historic character of Oregon City as much as possible without needlessly compromising individual property rights. So it's a balance that has to try to be achieved. I know that there's been some discussion about just having clear and objective standards, and I haven't been as much involved as far as some of the meetings with existing homes and just additions and repairs and things like that. But as far as the new construction aspect of it, I think there's value in the board, because I do think that there needs to be subjective evaluation. Otherwise, you almost wind up with a cookie cutter historic look, which wouldn't necessarily be accurate either. So I think the value of the board is grappling with the subjective aspect and try to discern if application is somewhat outside of the basic design guidelines. Is it complementary? And does that lend value to the historic district? So
I have a couple of, they're not on this list, but they specifically pertain to Kenema, which means that, I'm not going to be asking this question to the McLaughlin person. So what is your understanding about the history of Kenema? And as you mentioned, you don't want to have a cookie cutter approach, but there is a history to Kenema and what it stood, what it is, where it came from, its background and history, and the types of homes that were built there. So one of the things that's good to convey to people, I mean, this doesn't happen in the realty business, but what's trying to happen there? What is the whole objective and why the district is significant? And I think that there's a disconnect when people buy property there, that they don't really understand the background and why there are these standards, because this area is special. So did you do any of that research when you were, looking at buying this lot? You knew obviously it was in Kenema National Register District. I'm hoping you knew that.
I think it would be very ideal if there was some handout material or something available, that basically outlines Kenema and McLaughlin for potential purchasers or applicants. The obvious problem is, how do you get to it if somebody is just planning to purchase? You don't know who they are. You don't know who they are until they come in and make an application. In my case, I could sense, I knew it was a historic district, and I knew it would be a very challenging build because of the topography and so forth. So I actually went to the city and asked if it was possible to do a pre-app on property I did not own, and they said, yes, you can. So I did a pre-app before I even made an offer on the property to see what could be done. But generally speaking, people may not even know that that's available to them, but at least some communication. If somebody comes in and asks about building in Kenema or McLaughlin, here's kind of what the expectations, so it brings some realism without being too off-putting, because it is challenging.
The city has that, but unfortunately, as you pointed out, people don't know that. And if you look at houses that are for sale and you look at the flyers, many times there's not anything mentioned in the flyer that it's historic or it's in a district or whatever. And I don't even know. It's something I've been grappling with my entire career, is how we get that education out to the people that are actually doing this listing. So anyway.
I was fortunate in that the planner that I initially encountered, senior planner, when I came in with my concept plan, looked it over and gave me some tips right out of the gate before I did even a design advice. So I made changes to my concept plan before and without really being aware of the design guidelines or anything in particular at that point. I mean, I could see what the neighborhood makeup was, and what I had in mind was relatively consistent with that. But I did, so I think that's very valuable if that could be baked in the system somehow, where there's a little bit of gatekeeping. And of course, the design review process does do that. But even that initial introduction is helpful.
Do you have any questions for us?
No, I don't think so. Probably taking too much time already.
Well, thank you very much for coming in
Thank you.
and visiting with us. As you know, we are the premier historic city in the state, as I like to tell other people, and we have a lot of things that we can be very proud of. And thank you very much for your interest.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's launch right into Planning Commission. We'll call up Paul Espy. So rather than doing the introductions again, I believe you're already familiar with all of us.
I think I know you guys, yeah.
And so some of these questions, I'm just wondering if we want to modify them somewhat to move down, because obviously with Mr. Espy's profession, number one is sort of redundant.
Well, I all of a sudden want to say, honorable mayor and members of the council, good evening. It's an honor to be here with you this evening and for allowing this opportunity.
So Rocky, why don't you start with number two? I think if you want to just go over your background, I mean, we kind of know what it is because you're known in the
I've lived in Oregon City for 30 years. I have a family of 3, and I worked here at the city for a period of 7 years, and I serve as a long-range planner in the city of Lake Oswego, and I served there for about 22 years now.
And you're also a former planning commissioner.
And I was also a former planning commissioner for 8 years.
All right. Hold on.
Yep.
All right. What is the most important goal or purpose of the Planning Commission?
Well, I think, offhandedly, I think that the Planning Commission serves as a saucer to cool the tea. And I think it's really important for some of these more contentious land use issues and policy items to be reviewed and analyzed by the Planning Commission before it reaches the City Commission. If it does, most of the time we will be able to take care of it at the Planning Commission level without the City Council's input, depending upon the complexity and the type of policy or land use issue that we're working with. Planning Commission serves as an advisory body and land use review for quasi-judicial actions, and then also they uphold community values as embodied in the comprehensive plan. More of the squishy aspect of the role of a planning commissioner, but an important one nonetheless.
Okay. Frank?
Thank you.
Well, it's interesting to interview Mr. Espy because the first 2 questions I just put down C, resume, because it's there, and I've watched him in action years ago. But I will ask this next question, and I've seen him do this, but he can speak to it tonight also. The third question, Paul, is how would you go about balancing code requirements and possible negative comments and your personal opinion with allowing reasonable developments to go forward?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch some of that, but the gist was to balance code requirements with public testimony and any kind of new testimony that would be available that may not fit in with any code requirements. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, plus, and your own opinion as to the matter, your personal opinion, as stated in the questions before you, if that helps.
They're right there.
Thanks.
So,
Thank you.
question number 3.
Well, I think the first step in the analysis is to make sure that any kind of a land use issue or legislative issue either complies with the code or the elements in the comprehensive plan. I think that comparison absolutely needs to be made at the outset before you can make any kind of discretionary call on anything that's before us. And so then the next step would be if there is some discretion and it is reasonable and it does not run too far afoul of the code or the comprehensive plan, then we would be able to consider it.
Very good, thank you.
Michael?
Are you available to read the materials and attend the hearings, which are generally second and fourth Mondays of each month at 7 o'clock, as you well remember, I'm sure?
For the most part, I am available. I'll be honest with you, the City of Lake Oswego also has Planning Commission on Monday nights. I believe it's the second and fourth Monday nights. But I'm usually at the City Council with my items, so I only rarely go to the Planning Commission, and it's not very often that those conflicts would arise.
Thank you.
All right. What are your views on urban renewal and how it should be used in Oregon City?
I support urban renewal. I work in a community that uses that tool exhaustively and with great success. I think that it's important, on the other hand, is to make sure that there is a good amount of oversight in the urban renewal dollars that are being used. And I think it's important to make sure that you're looking at the menu of projects that are subject to urban renewal and making sure that those are good projects and that the money gets spent properly.
What are some of the differences between quasi-judicial hearings and legislative hearings?
Oh, boy. Well, I won't bore you with all of the details about the types of noticing that are required because I don't know if you necessarily want to hear that. I'm happy to provide that for you. But basically, the quasi-judicial has a little bit more of a rigid set of requirements and code requirements that those applications need to be reviewed under. And the legislative is more of a policy-oriented, which relies more on consistency with the comprehensive plan as opposed to the code.
All right, so do you have any questions for us? I think
Well-
you've been to this rodeo before.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what's next? I looked at your project list and I saw the vision statement, I saw racial equity in planning. You guys, I know, are working on HB 2001. You recently adopted your annexation code revisions, housing needs analysis, and all that other kind of stuff.
We had the first reading to adopt the new comprehensive plan, and you recall we
And the
worked on
comp
one
plan.
together.
Right, and so that's pretty exciting. I'm glad. I was wondering if you guys were going to be doing any work on climate-friendly or equitable communities, or if you were going to be doing anything more with HB 2001 in terms of mitigation, consistency with availability of infrastructure. I know I'm
I'll try to answer
rambling a little
the
bit,
first
but
part.
yeah, I'm excited. Yeah.
We as a community or the commission are not opposed to the climate-friendly communities. We did sign on to a letter with some of the other cities basically saying that we needed more time. That is our
Yeah.
issue.
It's
We don't have the staff capacity nor the bandwidth to embark on that. We are still trying to slog through, and I say slog, through HB 2001.
right. Yeah, that turned everything on its head, and now
Yes,
we've
it
got
did.
climate-friendly communities coming around the bend
So
as
we
well.
will get there.
Yeah.
We tried going the friendly route, which is saying, DLCD, please give us more time. And now we've gone to the other route, which is joining with other cities to possibly sue. So unfortunately,
Interesting.
again, it's not because we don't believe in that.
Right.
We do have some goals that deal with that. Again, it really, for us, it's the bandwidth. We just, we're,
Yeah, well, we as staff are trying to wrap our heads around it as well.
yeah. So
over in
we
our
will
shop.
get there. I just
Yeah.
hope that they will let us have more time.
Great. Yeah.
HB 2001, we have basically crafted it to work for Oregon City, and we've been allowed to do that. That was one of my major concerns. And I expressed that as a commissioner, and I've expressed it at different impact meetings as a mayor, basically saying, if we want to do this right, it has to be right for each of the communities. It can't be a cookie cutter approach, and God knows we don't want to do what everybody else is doing. So that's kind of a quick summation.
Great. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
very welcome.
Thank you.
Come on up, Carla. All right, you want to take a second? The questions are there.
Sure, thank you.
And so I have the first one. So what relevant experience, skills, and abilities have prepared you for wanting to be on the Planning Commission?
Well, initially, I was nominated as the neighborhood chair for my neighborhood association. At the time, it was Barclay Hills, and now it's Elyville. Eventually, I served on the Citizen Involvement Committee. I volunteered for several nonprofits. I basically gone through with my neighborhood association 2 land use appeals as a neighborhood chair. So I find that I have done, the first land use appeal was an experiment for sure, because it was my first one with my neighborhood. The second one, I think, was pretty sharp on what we did and what we were capable of doing without having a law degree. And I am more interested in involving the residents to have a voice in land use, and that's why I am interested in applying.
Could you elaborate that they already have a voice in land use, so what else would you do?
Well, of course, I would obviously be interested in what is going on in terms of applications, and obviously also concerning municipal code and what decisions that would need to be made to improve our city based on that, and help support the neighborhoods and also support developers as well for improvements, especially for more equitable and affordable housing and developments.
Rocky?
What is the most important goal or purpose of the Planning Commission?
The purpose of the Planning Commission is to make sure, first off, that there's several things that I've seen over the years that Planning Commission does. Planning Commission obviously creates policy and municipal code that is proposed to the City Commission. It also goes through land use applications on a smaller scale and sometimes a bigger scale. It looks at what's coming in terms of how it would, depending on where it's going to be in terms of transportation and safety, in terms of how it follows municipal code, and if it meets the criteria that are required based on where it's located. Because we have a very diverse area in Oregon City, as you well know, and depending on where you're at.
Carla, the third question is also in front of you. It's how would you go about balancing code requirements and possible negative comments, public comments, and your personal opinion with allowing reasonable development to go forward?
Well, I think as a planning commissioner, you're not only representing the community as terms of residents, but you're also representing possible developers coming in. So you need to come in with an unbiased perspective. You need to examine municipal code. Like on a land use appeal that I did, that we did for the neighborhood association, you look up that municipal code, you look up the specifics based on where it is, and then you actually look at the application and what meets in that criteria. So it's kind of like you look through that municipal code, you check what the application says, and develop questions based on that application.
Okay, next, are you available to read the materials and attend the hearings, which are generally second and fourth Mondays of each month at 7?
Yes, I would make that a priority, and I would make sure, since I'm more of a visual person, that that content is printed out, and I would be highlighting it as well.
Thank you. What are your views on urban renewal and how it should be used in Oregon City?
Obviously, urban renewal helps right now, our downtown area, our North End district, and long-term, I think those funds need to support downtown and the North End district. I also think it needs to meet the needs of the community and the residents of Oregon City.
What are some of the differences between quasi-judicial hearings and legislative hearings? I keep screwing that up.
Legislative is like municipal code and deciding policy, obviously, versus judicial is like a hearing in terms of if it meets that criteria. Well, you were saying here, excuse me, because I'm not a lawyer. But where was it? What number is it again?
Number 6.
Number 6. Quasi judicial would be more of judging a scenario based on policy, and in that case, as a planning commissioner, would be how it meets municipal code.
So I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on something you said
Okay,
earlier.
sure.
Basically, you mentioned that as a planning commissioner, you would be representing developers and the public, and I don't understand that.
You're supposed to be an unbiased representative, meaning you're not favoring one side or the other.
Right,
So
right,
me
right.
as a neighborhood chair, I need to come from a perspective where I'm just not on the residential side, that I need to entertain the developer side just as much. And, obviously give that a fair shot to be more unbiased when we get an application. And I think that's truly important for the development of Oregon City and projects to get done.
Okay, that's why I just wanted more clarification. It wasn't real clear because not everybody that comes before the planning commission is a developer. They're generally applicants. They're wanting to do something, and like you said, you have to balance the code saying X, and they want to do Y, and usually they've already talked to staff before all that.
Yeah, sorry, sometimes I'm assuming big projects as well. They're small ones. Obviously, we saw a sewer line go out not too long ago, and, a septic tank and connecting to the sewer line in terms of just being fair towards particular resident versus the community around it as well, and taking facts, comparing that to municipal code, and making an educated decision.
So you have the code. That's your Bible.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Do you have any questions for us?
I was wondering if, in the future, if you're looking for more people that are interested in terms of type 2, type 3, type 4, in terms of having more residents involved in the process in the future. Like in terms of, is there any changes in the future that will help residents be more involved in the process? Because that's what I'm hoping for in the future.
Well, since we got a whole pile of planners in the room, I would say that basically we are in Oregon City doing more than what the minimum state law requires.
Okay.
Because we have a very defined set of standards and criteria, there is a balance. The public needs to also be made aware, and they also need to pay attention to things that are going on, as opposed to at the end of the process when something's already a done deal. And I don't mean it's a deal like deal making, but it's already done. So we had a very robust process through our comprehensive plan, which is the guiding document. Then from there, you get to the implementing documents, which is the zoning code. When the land gets planned and zoned, that's really where the public can have the most impact, because they can talk to the commission, both commissions and the staff, about areas that they want to see changed here or there. Once the land is planned and zoned, it's not that it can't be changed, but the process of being involved about what can go there, that is pretty much done, and it's outlined by whatever the zoning standard is for that particular piece of property. So that's where people come in at the, what I would say at the end, when it's already been defined. And so what we have is a process where we have a piece of property that say it's zoned commercial. We have to apply those commercial standards that are in the municipal code to that piece of property and the standards. And if it's an outright permitted use, basically there is not really any way to deny something like that. So the process for getting involved usually comes at an earlier, I mean, everybody should be involved in every phase, and that's what our code is based on, the land use planning laws. They can be involved in all the phases. I don't know whether we have, and you can help me with this, whether we have the leeway as a jurisdiction because of our statewide land use planning to expand any of that. I mean, like I said, we already do more than just the minimum. There are some communities, they do just the bare minimum. We've gone over and beyond what is required for noticing people. When I think the staff has been very responsive to the fact when we have a larger development, they go out farther for notices. We started doing the postings back when Paul and I were working for the city. They never did that before. People didn't know until something started happening in the dirt. But, you know, I pay attention to those blue signs when I'm driving around. I say, oh, something's going on here, even though I don't get the notice about that. They can get on lists to get notices, not only in their neighborhood, but wherever they want, if they want to. I mean, I hate to say it, but sometimes people get stuff from the city of Oregon City and they toss it, and they really probably shouldn't be tossing it because it might be something that involves them.
And just one other question. Obviously, we're looking at House Bill 2003. We're looking at, we've obviously implemented 2001. Where are we at right now in terms of how we're going to implement that in the short term? Like, are we going to go through the whole process again like we did House Bill 2001?
Oh, I'm not sure which House bill you were mentioning.
2003, that's coming up?
I'm not, neither one of us are familiar with that.
Okay.
I'm not sure there's
I've been
a House,
starting to examine
a House
that
Bill
as well.
2003. The big kahuna is House Bill 2001, which we are in. So we finished the first phase of
Yeah, I saw that.
implementing that by putting standards in our code and allowing for additional development. As a matter of fact, in McLaughlin, there's a property that's going to be divided that's going to have a triplex on it, which is, you know, in an R6 zone, but because we now allow for that to occur on a larger lot, that's going to happen. Be a little more density. Tony's looking something up here, see if there's something
What
else
was
going on.
interesting
You know,
to
I'm talking
me-
about the climate-friendly communities bill.
Right.
Is that the one?
Well, there's one.
I don't remember the number of it.
Okay, yeah, I've been starting to study that as well. Yeah, because we have a situation in our neighborhood as well where there's a lot of quadplexes coming in. And the thing that's interesting about it is, as a neighborhood chair, I tried to join one to give feedback, and obviously because of an application process, I wasn't able to join that because I guess whomever's on that project can make the decision whether they want me to join or not. I'm hoping in the future possibly, is it considered that?
What do you mean by join?
Like, there was an initial after the application, there was an initial meeting with the planning department. I'm hoping in the future that maybe.
You may be involved in a pre-app, is that
Yeah,
what
like a
you're talking about?
pre-app, like if the neighbors can as well join a pre-app process in the future. Is that something possible?
I'm aware that there are some jurisdictions that may allow that. I don't know if it's something we've explored. Sometimes in a pre-app, people are dealing with confidential information.
Right.
That they do not want disclosed, and so there's a fine line, but it's something that we can take a look at. Have you experienced any publics sitting in on pre-apps?
Not that I recall. I could talk with Aquila to see if that's occurred lately, but I don't recall that.
I want to say that they may have done that in Portland, but the only pre-apps that I participated in were as a staff in Portland. When I was staff for another agency, I was able to sit in on a pre-app, particularly with if it was a client we were working with or it was something that directly affected any of the properties in our urban renewal area, we were allowed to do that. But then again, we were almost tied down to an NDA, which was a non-disclosure agreement, so we couldn't really talk about the specifics. Yes, go ahead.
To your question about House Bill 2003, we did adopt and complete our housing needs analysis. Echo Northwest did a very big study on that we took a couple meetings to get through to adopt that. And the other part of 2003 was requiring us to at least hear about what potential housing affordability strategies may be. And one of those I know are on our future work session agenda items, which is the construction excise tax.
Thank you.
Mayor McGriff?
But the needs analysis came before the work we did with the House Bill 2001. So we had to know what we were going to try to do. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
this was in compliance with 2003.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just quickly to Ms. Law's first question.
Sure.
Your question for us.
Sure.
I've expressed before, I have concerns about our type 2 process. And as we move into, we're wrapping up the OC 2040, then the next step will be to look at our code and see, okay, does our code match up with what we now have in our comprehensive plan? And I hope that as a part of that process that we can look at that type 2 process. And as Mayor McGriff said, we are hemmed in by state law, but I'm hoping there's some tweaks we can make to that.
Yeah.
We do now do a notice for type 2s, as I recall. We do notice for type 2s.
Oh, yes.
And so people have a certain amount of time that they can participate in that particular application.
Correct.
Type 2s are not super discretionary. There's this standard versus that standard, and it's not like you can participate and not have it allowed. It's not, it's beyond that. It's already allowed, it's there, and now you're commenting on the specificity of the design or the construction of that thing, but it's not like the type 2 you can say, oh, well, this shouldn't be allowed here. It's generally, the type 2 is the minimal amount. Type 1 is where it's just black or it's white and it gets approved. But we can look into that. It was something, yes, thank you for reminding me about the fact that we talked about that during the 2040.
Thank
All
you
right.
for your time, and I
Thank
won't hold
you.
you up anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
House
Hi,
Bill-
Brandon, come on up.
House Bill 2003 was 2019, so that's when we did the housing needs analysis.
We did it in 2019.
That's when it passed the legislature. It was in 2019, and then in 2021, I believe, was
We
House
recently
Bill
went over that, yes.
2001. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a little out of sync. Hi, Brandon, welcome.
Good evening.
You're familiar with everybody?
I am, yes.
Okay, so we'll just go right to it. So what relevant experiences, skills, and abilities have prepared you for the Planning Commission?
Great, that's a good question. Well,
And you have the questions there.
I do, yes, thank you. So I think if you looked at my resume, you'll know for about the past 15 years, I've been in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. I'm currently employed by Scott Edwards Architecture out of Portland. I'm an associate there, and I co-lead their civic studio. And so most of my experience has been in public work in terms of architecture and design. So I think I would bring a wealth of knowledge and background that would support the commission.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you. What is the what is the most important goal or purpose of the Planning Commission?
Sure, and I think this is my opinion, or is that correct?
Your opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, my opinion, yeah, great, okay, cool. I think, the bylaws are pretty clear. Planning Commission's an advisory board. We advise the city commission on different land use elements. But to me personally, the most important role of Planning Commission is to listen. Foremost, we're here to help applicants, and like you'd mentioned, Mayor McGriff, applicants come in many different forms. Most of the time, they're not aware, they're not knowledgeable, and so I think as a commissioner, we're there to listen, and we're there to help, drive the process, get people to understand what we're really trying to accomplish here as a planning commission, and so to me, that is the priority.
Thank you.
I suppose before I ask the question, I will say that he and I had occasion to work together for a prolonged period of time during the construction of the Public Works building. So I'll just make that public. Having said that, question 3, is, as before you, how would you go about balancing code requirements and possible negative public comments and your personal opinion with allowing reasonable developments to go forward?
Sure. I appreciate the acknowledgement, Commissioner Donald, and I think that's a great point. You know, some of my professional experience has been local here in the city of Oregon City. As Frank mentioned, or Commissioner Donald mentioned, I was the project manager on the city's operations and engineering facility on First Street, and worked previously with a former employer on the Public Works facility on South Center Street. Both of those projects had rigorous process. You know, we had to go through HRB approval, we had to come in front of Planning Commission, and those applications also required requests for variances and whatnot. And so I understand that our city code, municipal code, is pretty thorough. It's very detailed, and it addresses a lot of different circumstances, but it's also a set of guidelines, and not every application for development fits nicely in that framework. And so I think there is a balance in terms of taking public comment, positive or negative, and working through that framework to find a consensus and a common ground. I think first and foremost, it's an education, like getting people to understand, here are the standards, why do we have standards? Also in the code, there's provisions, you know, to allow for some leniency and variation within how you would meet a certain standard. So I think as a planning commission, there's a lot of discretion in there. You know, you really need to hear the challenges from the applicant and also try to understand how they are indeed trying to meet the standard and again, find that common ground.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are you available to read the materials and attend the hearings, which are generally second and fourth Mondays of the month at 7 p.m.?
Most definitely, yes.
Thank you.
What are your views on urban renewal and how it should be used in Oregon City?
Great. You know, urban renewal historically is really meant for blighted and, you know, rougher areas of town, if you will. And I've been in Oregon City for a little over 8 years now, and I don't really think we have any of those in our community. But it is a good tool to use to push development. The increment financing is a way to do that that makes it viable for, you know, not only developers but for the city. And so I think, you know, the way that the Urban Renewal Commission is using those funds and using that intent should be supported. I support that as an individual. And I think looking, you know, currently at the north end of our downtown, that's a great use of those resources.
What are some of the differences between quasi-judicial hearings and legislative hearings?
Excellent.
Thank you.
I don't know that I would give you, I don't know that I'll be able to give you the textbook definition, but quasi-judicial is, you know, refers back to court hearings, and it's, how do you say it? It doesn't require a court. It's a group of body that provides a hearing that refers back to procedure. When you look at legislative hearings, those are obviously heavy on procedure, but they're hard and fast standards that that group is trying to get to.
So do you have any questions for us? Do you have any questions for us?
You know, you answered, unfortunately, I probably should have sat outside and not listened to the questions were already asked, but I won't get you to repeat yourself. But I am interested in next steps, you know, how you go about making a decision and when us as applicants might hear.
About how we're going to make the decision?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Well, we plan on making the appointments at our first meeting in January.
Great.
And I guess everybody's maybe taking their own copious notes on each person, and then we will rank the folks. We're probably not going to be having the discussion about it tonight, are we? Or can we?
It's
Either
up
way.
to the commission.
It will be the pleasure of the commission then, so I'll defer to my colleagues here. If they feel like everything is pretty clear-cut, then we can make a decision tonight and then make the appointments on January the 4th. There are a whole slew of other, besides the Planning Commission and the Historic Review Board, that I am slogging through respectfully to all the applicants for the other boards and commissions that are vacant. And
Sure.
I think I only have one more set to go, so hope to do those all at the same time on that day as well.
Great.
Did I get that okay? Mr. Conkle, did I get the correct dates?
Well, I appreciate that feedback.
I have one specific question. If you were sitting on planning commission and you were called upon to review a project such as the one we completed, how would you handle that?
So you're saying an application that maybe my office or myself had submitted for review?
Yeah,
I think the appropriate thing would be to recuse myself.
very good. That's
Step
all I
away.
need to hear.
Yeah. The other approach that, because my employer is aware of what I'm asking and wanting to do, and, we would be able to strategically plan that, when we're doing work in the city. I am currently doing work for the city of Oregon City, particularly for the Parks Department. I'm working with Denise Conrad and John Waverly on the new restroom building that's going into Mountain View Cemetery, and I know that the city has a few RFPs out that my office is in the process of responding to.
I think those types of projects are not anything that's going to come before the planning commission, so I
Correct.
don't think you're in jeopardy of having any conflict. I think what Frank was alluding to is anything that might come before the planning commission where there might be perceived to be a conflict, and I don't think the Public Works building went before the planning commission at all because it was
Did it?
a permitted, no, it was an outright permitted use in the zone,
No,
so
we-
it was design review.
Didn't such things as landscaping and all come
No,
up?
that was
Yeah,
all design
it-
review.
No, it
we-
came before the
Did
planning
it?
commission. Yes.
Yeah, we
Or-
did.
Landscaping was one.
Yeah.
So it was a type
Number
3.
of parking spaces, I think,
it a type
came
3?
up. Yeah, because actually the
Oh, they had variances?
that front courtyard
Yes,
had
yes,
variance.
so they had variances. but-
Yeah.
But
You were there.
But the application itself, in terms of the use, didn't come before the planning commission.
No.
It was
that's-
basically the variances that were
Variances.
required.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was
So
variances and,
I was thinking of a broader, like,
yeah,
you're building something that requires a conditional use permit or whatever, yeah, that would,
Correct.
and that's going to come before the planning commission, and yeah, you wouldn't be involved in that.
it had the variances that we were requesting and then also some non-conforming items that we were addressing.
Because we kind of had a non-conforming building.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you. Petronella, are you ready? So we have the questions there, so you can look them over as they are being repeated. Give you just a quick second there. So what relevant experiences, skills, and abilities have prepared you for being on the Planning Commission?
First of all, my name is Petronella Donovan. Nice to be here, Commissioners, and I just want to say I'll put this closer to me.
Yes.
First of all, I just want to say congratulate Mayor McGriff for getting reelected, and the two, Rocky Smith and Commissioner Adam Arnold and Mike Mitchell. Congratulations to you all. So first question, what experience have prepared me for this? Well, I have been in front of the Planning Commission on several of my projects. So I think from personal experience that that has definitely prepared me for what a Planning Commission does.
Okay. What is the most important goal or purpose of the Planning Commission?
Well, the Planning Commission advises or airs the support for the City Commission. It deals with land use materials.
Okay. The third question before you, how would you go about balancing code requirements and possible negative public comments and your personal opinion with allowing reasonable development to go forward?
I actually was in this one where actually I had quite a bit of people against one of my, actually several of my projects that it was a hard thing to go through. What I would do is listen to everybody. I think that's the most important thing, listen to everybody. And actually the code is really what should guide you at the end of the day. And then that's where I would look at. But absolutely give everybody a voice. That's why we're here. And look at what is reasonable. There's reasonable attitudes, but at the end of the day, you have to go by what the code is.
Okay. Are you available to read the materials and attend the hearings, which are generally second and fourth Monday of each month at 7 p.m.?
Yes.
What are your views on urban renewal and how it should be used in Oregon City?
Urban renewal, I think it's a good idea, but I do think that there needs to be some oversight, especially on how that money is spent.
What are some of the differences between quasi-judicial hearings and legislative hearings?
Well, I've been in quite a few legislative hearings. I also do a lot of work with the state of Oregon. So I go a lot of where the rules and regulations are, what the laws are. Judicial are more, I think you're legislative with a lot of the urban renewal stuff that you guys are doing, but the quasi-judicial is more of a, gosh, how should I say this? More of procedure, and this one more, the other one's more of rules. I hope that makes sense.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for us?
No, I don't.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate your taking the time to come in and dealing with these questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you.
So, fellow commissioners, what is your pleasure?
If I may suggest, we could do the easiest one first, which would be the HRB. We have a single applicant. I would just like to comment on what, his qualifications and statements he made, and why I personally would qualify him for the position. And I would refer specifically, he made some astute observations, I thought. He talked about ambiguous communication and how important, and the effect of that on the outcomes and on succeeding. He talked about in-process inspection, which I know a number of us are sympathetic to that, rather than get to the end and find out that's not what was wanted.
I think sympathetic is not even the word to use.
I'm trying to be generous. He talked about the overlay effect of different things, I thought was a very astute observation, whether it be geotech and HRB and all, and how confounding that can be. Talked about seeking a possible middle ground in a contentious hearing, listen and draw on positive aspects. That's a real skill in running a meeting. He talked about objective evaluations being necessary in making decisions, striking a balance. I thought he made an interesting observation, and we talked about the homeowners that or prospective purchasers that buy in Kenema with no understanding of what's about. And I almost thought about, should there be a posting at all entrances to Kenema and said, be advised that this area has specific requirements, please consult city. Because, how many times do they get into that situation?
They have no idea, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yeah, I know.
No idea.
And by the time they've made the purchase or they're in a purchase and sale agreement, it's too late. So I thought the gentleman, and I thought his demeanor was excellent. So I would find him a more than acceptable addition to the HRB.
I agree with that. He seemed like a very good candidate.
I agree.
I took it upon myself to go to Kenema today and look at the house that he built because I wanted to see for myself, in my mind, how it met the criteria and standards. New construction in Kenema has been, how would I say, a little bit tricky. And I think it goes back to exactly what you pointed out. I have found that in the whole time that I've been here, and even when I was working for the city, that I have spoken to my friends in the real estate industry about how can we get information out to people to make sure that it's not just a buyer beware situation. And I have confronted this in my own neighborhood where houses adjacent to me have been for sale, talking to the realtor, and I don't know what to do about that, but it's very frustrating, and I found it very frustrating when I worked for the city, when someone would come in, as you say, bought a piece of property in Kenema, had no idea that they were in an I've even asked them, did you actually even go out and look at it to see that it was in a steep slope, or was there water, or, no. And there's only so much the city can do. We have to rely sort of on the reasonable person theory that someone is going to try to do their due diligence, but they don't always. And I think our staff does a great job of trying to inform people, to help them understand just really what it is you're getting into. I appreciate the fact that Mr. Green has a construction background, because I found that in going to HRB meetings in the past, when we had John McLaughlin on there, who was also a contractor and worked on historic buildings, he had some understanding of how things go together and how things work and the symmetry of a building. And I found that that was helpful to the board, because that's not everybody's expertise. We do have a majority of the candidates, not candidates, people that currently sit on the board, they are in historic homes. So that is really helpful to applicants, because they're going through the same procedure. What I was concerned about, which I'm not concerned about now, was that there has been in the past, any new construction that came through in that district was just automatically rubber stamped by the group that was submitting the recommendation, without regard to helping the applicant understand what the standards were, what the criteria was. And as I've mentioned to Mr. Green, Kenema is a very, very special neighborhood. It can have new construction. It can have compatibility, but it can't be anything goes. And I think that, like you said, there might be signs posted. So I would go ahead and concur with your suggestion, and I don't have any reservations.
As an aside, I would say this, trying to keep with the courteous theme, with divergent viewpoints as to how that place should be developed.
Yeah. Well, we've got the guidelines, we've got the whole purpose and scope of the district. And I think, again, it's all about information and education.
And the question is, should that be almost an attachment to the title? And that's another solution, almost like a lien or a whatever you want to call it.
We actually talked about that during my tenure, that we had some extra money. We were trying to get grant money to attach to the historic properties, just so that it would come up. And,
because staff can't help it. The opportunity to communicate never comes up. But if you see it in your title search, and then we're not here to solve that tonight, but it's just an observation.
I will say that some people don't even look at that when they're purchasing either. They don't look at their title.
I can't help those people.
I know, I understand. I totally get that. All right.
I can't.
Do we want to make a motion? We're not in a work session anymore. This is a special meeting.
Sorry?
Yeah.
I'll get this figured out.
That's okay. It's confusing because this is a work session night. But this is a special meeting. Do we want to make a decision tonight?
If you'd like.
Why not?
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and make a motion?
Be my guest.
I will move to appoint Robert Green to the Historic Review Board as the Kenema Neighborhood Representative.
Could I interrupt? Don't we have a second meeting next week for a second applicant for the Historic Review Board?
We
That's for
do.
the
For a
McLaughlin
different
neighborhood
position.
position.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's two
Yeah,
Historic Review Board applications, but like, if we had two people for Kenema, that would be different. Or we had two people for McLaughlin, one's for McLaughlin and one's for Kenema.
Second.
Okay, on the motion?
Okay, Commissioner Mike Mitchell,
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Mayor Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Motion
We will
passes.
finalize that on the 4th. So, all right, now to the Planning Commission. I think if I may, I would go ahead and lead off. It's obviously
Feel free.
obvious that, not obvious, well, I think that we would be well suited to recommending appointment to Mr. Paul Espy. He has been a planning commissioner. He is a professional land use planner. It's obvious that he has a significant grasp of what to do, what needs to be done, and he will bring his considerable experience back to the Planning Commission after having go-round on this, and so I think that he's my number one choice.
Agreed.
Agreed. No question about it.
Okay. All right, and I'm grateful that he stepped up again.
As am I.
Should I make a motion?
Let's just do them together.
Okay.
So how did we rank the remainder candidates? I didn't finish writing mine in, but I know where I'm going,
Do
so.
it right now.
Mr. Mitchell, do you want to lead off?
I think in terms of experience, knowledge of how development works, I think Mr. Dole would be my second choice after Mr. Espy.
Anybody else want to chime in? Well, I guess I'll just add a comment. What I am seeking for the Planning Commission is very strong representation. Someone that will commit to doing the work, and it is hard work, as Mr. Mitchell and I both know, and you other commissioners know as well because we get it on the rebound. But the initial evaluations and initial work that needs to be done at the Planning Commission is something that I feel is very, very significant, and we need to have people that have a really clear understanding of what the process is. It's not that people can't learn, but I think that where we are going with our new 2040 and some of the other implementing legislation that we are going to be passing through here, that we just really need people with a very strong background and a commitment to basically look sort of beyond the boundaries of where they live and look at it as a citywide issue. Now, of course, that doesn't prevent anybody from saying, well, we know we've got this type of density in this area of town, we got this over here, we got this over. Where do we need to spread those things around? So that's really what one of my criteria was, looking at that, how that would broaden the base of knowledge on the Planning Commission.
I go back and forth and for very different reasons. I know Mr. Dole, and I've worked with him, and he's very capable. I should have clarified, because at one point when he was talking about urban renewal and blighted areas, I thought he said we didn't have any, and then
Yes.
and then turned right around and talked about.
No, I heard that he said we did. That's
No.
what I heard. I heard
Did
the word
not.
did.
No.
Okay, well, that's what I heard. It was,
But then he did talk about the north end.
yeah,
Right,
Yeah.
but understanding that is in fact, there's multiple
Yeah.
blighted areas
Right.
there, so that kind of shocked me. His professional knowledge, I know firsthand, is good. Now, when I look at Carla Laws, well, she's been an activist, and she's been in the thick of many things. And, she brings her own perspective. Sometimes it seems a little abrupt, but I'm just trying to strike that balance on this planning commission, and is she a good choice? And it comes down, that's why the only two positions I struggle with between second and third.
Me too.
So,
Yeah, agreed. I have the same issue.
I mean,
It is not a clear-cut choice.
no, but for different reasons. As from a
Right.
professional status, Mr. Dole is there because he does this for a living. From a community knowledge and ongoing engagement, right, wrong, or indifferent, the woman has been in the thick of many a discussions. And she has oftentimes expressed the same concerns I have, which are usually shortcomings in the control documents. I don't think, I've not seen her be opposed to development in general, but in meeting and holding people accountable to establish criteria, even during the course of construction. So that's why I anguish between those two. I wish I had three positions because I'd put them both on, but I don't. So,
did you want to say anything?
Well, first of all, I'm just very grateful that we are doing this in the first place. I think this is much needed change and improvement to how things have been going historically. And so I just want to first of all acknowledge that. And also that I was impressed by all the candidates for the Planning Commission. I think it was a good cross-section of the different interests that we would like to see represented on the Planning Commission. And I'm going back and forth for my second and third with Mr. Dole and Ms. Donovan. Petronella was my second choice after now Commissioner Mitchell when we were having our appointment interviews for this commission. And I think that her experience on the Transportation Advisory Commission or committee would be helpful on there or on that committee. And then everything that's already been said about Mr. Dole. But factoring in what I know of them now and what I have read in their in their resumes and what has taken place tonight during the interviews, my second choice would be Brandon Dole.
I'll split the vote, just because I feel strongly about the hometown connection and the ongoing engagement. Whether I agree with the past presentations or not, I'll cast a vote for Laws in the second position.
So I'm weighing second and third on the same conversation, same discussion that we've all just had. Between Brandon Dole and Carla Laws. I feel like want to give credit to people that are continually involved, make an effort to be involved. I think Paul Espy has shown that. He comes from a background that we all are aware of and feel is a good position. I think that having a balance with him and a citizen that doesn't necessarily have that development background but is involved in the community, involved in the neighborhood, gives a voice to that. And any of us sitting up here know the amount of work that it takes to do that or be involved in the community, but a whole different level to sign your name on a piece of paper to run for public office and to win third out of 6 people for a city commission position. That says a lot about anyone, and we know we had pretty strong candidates in that election. I think it says a lot for her ability to be a communicator for the public and for, actually for one of the reasons we wanted this commission to have a say in placing people on the Planning Commission. And so I think between the two, having Paul Espy and Carla would balance that out. So that's where I'm leaning.
Actually, I want to thank Rocky for that because he actually stated better those things I thought.
Listening to my fellow commissioners, and I think this is a great collaboration, and I appreciate that. I'm changing my mind. And another thing that I just thought of, when we reviewed the bylaws for the Planning Commission, one of the phrases that is in there as far as what is the purpose of the Planning Commission, I don't remember the exact words, but I think it was to be a voice for the citizens. And Carla Laws would do that. So my two would be now Paul Espy and Carla Laws. And to that balance issue that the other commissioners have mentioned.
Well, I guess I will kind of give my pros and cons and all that. So looking at the makeup of the current Planning Commission, I feel that we do already have some balance. Where I have been concerned, and I will be very honest about it, is that I don't think everybody on the Planning Commission has been pulling their weight. And that concerns me when we have these very important decisions coming up, and we have, people are not there. My one reservation about Ms. Laws is that she has been here not in a proactive manner, but always against something in terms of Planning Commission applications. Whereas Petronella has been at Planning Commission basically in more of a positive standpoint. She had an application that required a conditional use permit. She took the time to meet with the neighbors to talk about their concerns. I didn't participate in that, but I was at that hearing. But it was there for someone else. And she could have easily, kind of gone off the rails and been upset about it, but she basically spent a lot of time mending fences. The issue was the height of the development and how the neighbors didn't want something looming over them. And so what came out of that was an offer to make some accommodation and move it so that it wasn't just directly adjacent to this person's house and really do some changes, which, again, took some doing, but it was there. I definitely applaud the neighborhood association for their activism, but a lot of it stemmed from the standpoint that it was really a NIMBY issue. And there really wasn't a lot that we could do when it came to us on appeal to minimize that, because it was an outright allowed permitted use. And what we were debating over had a lot to do with the way it looked, the design, the access, those sort of things. But it was mostly, well, we don't really want this density in our neighborhood, so please go away, which we didn't have a whole lot of options, nor did the Planning Commission. So that's my one reservation, is that, and I should have asked a question, is, can you be objective with regard to, development where something is allowed and you've got people coming in and say, well, isn't there a way for us to get rid of this? So that's my concern.
We have,
I'll make a motion to appoint Paul Espy and Carla Laws to the Planning Commission.
I'll second it.
Commissioner Mike Mitchell,
Aye.
Kind of hope
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
separately, but that's okay. Oh, would you like to sign these?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I know, I was wondering where my
Wait, we
sheets
have a
were.
motion in process.
I
I
know.
couldn't hear.
it's just that.
Was that,
Oh, are we?
No,
are
we have a
voting?
motion in process. You called the first name, we voted. I couldn't hear who you called.
Oh, sorry. So the first name was Commissioner Mike Mitchell,
Aye.
and then Commissioner Adam Morrow,
aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
and Mayor Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Motion passes.
What remains?
That's it.
All right, let's take a brief break before we move into our next meeting. Yes, let's take a brief break before we move into our next meeting.
So I think we'll adjourn this meeting.
Yes.
and-
Yeah.
yep.
And we will